Large language models are inherently probabilistic. They guess the next word based on statistical likelihood. In a creative writing task, that variability is a feature. But when an AI system processes highly sensitive child custody data, trauma reports, or safety plans, that unpredictability becomes a severe liability. You cannot afford an output that changes its logic from one session to the next. The standard approach to controlling this variance is prompt engineering, writing increasingly complex instructions, hoping the model will comply. But in high-stakes clinical and legal environments, asking a model nicely to be objective and trauma-informed fails. The underlying math of the model will eventually override the prompt, leading to hallucinations or biased advice. CoTrackPro removes the model's ability to improvise. Instead of relying on dynamic runtime code, where the AI generates its own operational logic on the fly, it relies entirely on a declarative configuration repository. A declarative repository means all the instructions live as static text files on disk. Every capability the AI has, its skills, its specific professional roles, the workflows it follows, and the safety rules it must obey, is hard-coded into YAML and Markdown documents. No application code actually lives in this repository. By shifting the operational logic out of the model's generative process and into static, readable files, we establish strict, unmoving boundaries. The model no longer decides how to behave. It simply executes the exact architectural blueprint it is handed. To turn those static files into an active system, CoTrackPro requires an execution layer. That layer is Google Antigravity, an agent orchestration runtime designed to read and execute Claude-compatible skill files. Antigravity targets a single inventory file called manifest.yaml. This machine-readable map tells the orchestration engine exactly what skills and rules to load directly from the repository. It automatically registers and links each predefined skill through standard front matter conventions, requiring absolutely no custom integration code. The intelligence of the large language model is effectively fenced in. The predictability of the system relies entirely on the structural pathways defined by the orchestration engine, reducing the AI to a processing unit that follows strict, predetermined routes. To maintain control over how the AI acts, CoTrackPro divides its operations into two strictly isolated tiers, a base capability layer and a user-facing production layer. This animated diagram maps the base capability layer. These 7 modular building blocks represent the functional skills. They are narrow, distinct primitives. One handles factual incident documentation, another builds chronological timelines, and a third formats legal documents. They do not interact with the user. They only process data. Directly above those primitive blocks sit 18 specialized personas. This is the production layer. These are the user-facing agents, personas like a family court judge, a mediator, or a survivor safety parent. Each has deep domain knowledge, but critically, they lack native processing tools. When a persona needs to accomplish a task, it must reach down and compose one of the functional primitives. A user-facing agent cannot invent a new way to write a timeline. It is forced to route the data through the dedicated timeline builder skill. If the guardian ad litem persona receives details about an altercation between parents, it does not analyze the text and draft a summary itself. It calls the incident documentation primitive, which extracts the facts into a court-neutral record and then hands that structured record back up to the guardian persona. By forcing specialized agents to use shared, rigid tools rather than generating their own logic on the fly, the system prevents errors from compounding. The persona focuses solely on domain expertise, while the underlying primitive handles the mechanics flawlessly every time. If you embed safety instructions directly into the prompts of 18 different agents, those instructions will eventually degrade. A complex prompt will prioritize a user's immediate task over a generic safety warning, leading to inconsistent enforcement across the system. This solid dome represents the single file CoTrackPro guardrails.md. It is the system's non-negotiable canonical safety layer. Every output from every skill, workflow, and integration must pass through this exact file. It cannot be bypassed or relaxed by downstream consumers. A continuous integration gate aggressively scans all 68 files in the repository. If an engineer attempts to write a new prompt that includes its own redundant safety rules, the CI script flags the duplication and fails the build. The policy exists in exactly one place to prevent drift. Those centralized guardrails enforce 7 rigid principles. Every response must use calm, neutral, trauma-informed language. It must maintain strict court neutrality, and it is explicitly forbidden from fabricating dates, parties, or jurisdictional citations. As the text clears the safety review, it hits a structural checkpoint. The system forces all generated data to conform to 133 specific JSON schemas. Whether it is an incident report or a court packet, the data is forced into a predictable, machine-readable shape. Applying a global safety filter and restricting outputs to rigid JSON structures physically boxes in the language model. The variance of probabilistic text generation is contained, producing reliable outputs safe for courtroom review. Processing data internally is only half the requirement. A justice tech platform must also interact with real-world infrastructure, pulling session history from AWS, updating case statuses in Airtable, or scheduling hearings on Google Calendar, without exposing the system to external vulnerabilities. CoTrackPro handles this external communication using the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. The repository contains 11 specific MCP configuration files that create direct, secure bridges to these third-party databases and storage systems. This diagram illustrates how these external vaults connect to the central system. Each narrow pipeline represents an MCP integration operating on a strict principle of least privilege. The configuration files dictate the exact minimal access required for a specific task, and nothing more. During execution, Antigravity actively negotiates these permissions on a per-skill basis. If the legal document formatter attempts to read an email via the Gmail MCP, the valve remains locked because that skill lacks the explicit declared scope to access external correspondence. Restricting tool access at the individual primitive level guarantees that even if an AI agent misinterprets a command, it lacks the operational authority to delete a database or leak protected information. When a user submits a complex paragraph detailing a recent custody dispute, the system faces a routing problem. A single input might require legal analysis, emotional support, and a factual timeline simultaneously. This primary intake node represents OmniBuild, the central orchestration primitive and triage mechanism. It processes all incoming data through a strict 3-step pipeline before any specialized work begins. In Step 1, OmniBuild dissects the input to identify specific triggers. It calculates the risk level and immediately flags elevated threat situations, such as safety incidents or mandatory reporting requirements, isolating them for urgent processing. Step 2 involves the roles router. Based on the classified triggers from Step 1, the router maps the user's situation to the correct specialist personas. It determines exactly which of the 18 agents need to be involved in the response. In the final step, OmniBuild generates a specific action plan for each assigned role and spawns the sub-agents in parallel. The attorney persona might begin drafting a court packet, while the parent coach simultaneously prepares de-escalation strategies, entirely independent of one another. This exact sequence, intake, triage, routing, and parallel execution, is not improvised. It is rigidly dictated by a static YAML orchestration recipe called sessionlifecycle.yaml, ensuring the system follows the identical operational checklist for every single user. By fracturing a complex user narrative into isolated domain-specific tracks, the system forces each AI agent to focus strictly on its area of expertise. There is now confusion over responsibilities and no blending of legal advice with clinical support. To see the complete architecture in motion, trace a severe event, like a user reporting a child custody violation, from input to final output. The raw text hits OmniBuild. The engine immediately classifies the violation trigger, sets the risk level to high, and simultaneously spawns the bailiff, the attorney persona, and the survivor advocate. Those specialized personas immediately pull from the base capability layer. They route the user's chaotic narrative through the timeline builder and evidence organization skills, converting raw emotion into factual, chronological documentation. Before any of that compiled data reaches the user or the external database, it is pushed through the canonical safety guardrails. Any inflammatory language is neutralized, and personally identifiable information is flagged and redacted. Every phase of this workflow is constrained by static configuration files. Layering these rigid architectural boundaries removes the model's autonomy, forcing the orchestration engine to produce a mathematically consistent, entirely safe execution path every single time. Operating large language models in environments involving child custody, trauma, and the courts requires absolute precision. You cannot achieve that precision by feeding complex instructions into a prompt box and hoping the model interprets them correctly. Dynamic runtime generation is fragile. It drifts, it hallucinates, and it adapts when it shouldn't. True reliability requires stripping away that dynamism and replacing it with a static, declarative configuration repository, where every rule, skill, and workflow is a permanent fixture. Ultimately, safe AI in high-stakes domains is an engineering problem. It is solved not by building a smarter model, but by constructing an unyielding structural casing around it.